The textbook talks very little about the actual negotiations of a deal and the constructs of a deal. So I want to introduce these concepts to you, and you're going to see that you use these in your Solar Shield case analysis. To me, this is the fascinating part of watching, or this is a fascinating part of entrepreneurship. Through the IDWF Business Plan Competition and through being the executive director of the Texoma Angels, I've listened to lots of presentations now and heard judges and investors make decisions. And it's always interesting to see how the deal comes together or does not come together. So the deal is a agreement between two parties for mutual benefit. What do you as the entrepreneur need? You need money, you need connections, you need advice to make your idea go. What do you have to offer in return? You have a chunk of a business proposition that you think down the road is going to make a lot of money. What does an investor have? Hopefully all the things, not just money, but also connections, the ability to give good advice. And what are they looking for? They're looking for an opportunity for them to make money. Right up front, I want to tell you that so many things you have heard about red lines in the sand, for example, 51%, that people think is such a big deal is not nearly what they think it is, largely because this deal has many facets and it's negotiation at every step. And you can push me really hard on this point and I can give to you because I can get my interest protected over here on these other points. So there's a lot of things going on here, and that's what makes it so much fun. In the end, though, remember what you're trying to do, both as the entrepreneur and as the investor, is balance risk and reward. What are the risks of taking an investor from your standpoint as far as the entrepreneur goes? Well, you're worried about having somebody telling you what to do in your ear all the time. You're really worried about being removed from your own company, perhaps. What's the investor worried about? Beyond the mere fact that most ventures will not go nearly as well as planned, and we'll talk about that a little bit, or we already talked about that some in terms of the sources of the funds and the way things work out. But what investors are afraid of is that you're going to poof away the money in unwise ventures, either because you're well-intended but foolish, or because maybe you're not as well-intended as they would like. So each side is wanting to balance this risk and reward, and you're going to see that reflected in the deal terms. So what are many of the issues that tend to get debated in the deal? Well, there's always this mix of, or this type of equities, the type of stock and the voting rights that go with that stock. Some investors prefer common stock. Some investors prefer preferred stock. The typical thing for most startups is that the investors receive preferred stock with a conversion right to common stock. The thing about preferred stock is it's just that, it's preferred. So if there was a liquidation event, the preferred stock owners would be first in line to try to get their money back. Often preferred stock owners can try to put in some sort of a dividend policy where they can get paid a dividend, or perhaps part of their investment can be staged as a loan such that they can draw interest on that. The voting rights are important, although sometimes you'll see preferred stockholders won't be as worried about voting rights as you might think, and I'll explain why in just a couple of minutes. So the next point, if there is debt involved in the deal, and sometimes even in an equity deal, the investors will write in a debt-like component, but more likely dividends, these are going to be set. So sometimes you will see that investors will write in that we are going to receive a 10% dividend no matter what, which is to say that, and when I say no matter what, if the company's got to be making money to pay a dividend, but that's their way of saying I'm going to start to get some money back on my investment, Mr. Entrepreneur, and you're going to have to make money above and beyond that if you want to get rich, Ms. Entrepreneur. So that's a way for them to try to draw a floor in on their returns. Representation on the board. This is a big deal, and this is why this whole 51%, make sure you maintain 51% ownership of the company, because that's what it's all about. Well, not so much. Let me give you an example. Let's say that as part of an investor's deal, they require that you create a 3-person board. You, the founder, can be one seat on the board. They, the investor, are going to get a second seat on the board. The third seat will be mutually agreed upon between the two of you. So let's say you go out and get a respected businesswoman from the community with expertise in your field, and you give her a small amount of equity in return for her sitting on the board. You, the entrepreneur, charge off. All it cost you to get all this money from this investor was 20% of the stock. You gave that independent director 1%, so you still own 79% of the stock, way over 51%. You are golden. You can do whatever you want to do as a CEO, right? Wrong. Here's why that board representation is so important. Who does the board represent? The shareholders. You've agreed that this is how that this is how the board is going to be appointed with those three directors. And so, if you and the investor become at loggerheads over the direction of the company, you think this way, the investor thinks this way. Well, you go, I own 79% of the company. I'm going to do whatever I want. You got a board of directors. If the investor is able to convince that third independent director that you're nuts, that you're driving this company to the ground, then what they can do, the two of them can vote to say, we are replacing you as the CEO and going to hire a new CEO. Boom, you're out of your own company. Very importantly, how much of your company do you still own? 79%. You've been removed as the CEO. They haven't taken your equity away from you. You could get into some interesting things with vesting options and the like. But the point I want you to see is if the investor has a reasonable opportunity to influence board decisions, the board is who controls the company. And when that's laid in, they can very easily remove a founder as an employee of the company simply by firing them by the board. Now, I don't want to make you think that this happens all the time. It doesn't. But what I do want you to see is that this idea of, well, you got to maintain 51% to keep control of your company, it's just not so. What really matters is how the board representation is drawn up, because that can determine who has control of your company. Another term that is frequently there is restrictions on raising future monies. So typically equity investors, A, won't let you raise more equity without their permission, and B, if you do have to raise more equity, then they want the opportunity to invest first. So they don't want to take the chance early on with a startup, getting it going, things are looking pretty good, and now the entrepreneur turns to all of his or her buddies and say, hey, this is looking really good, you can come in and invest in my company now. A lot of the risk's been driven out. Those early investors are going to say, if this thing's looking good, I want to have the right to pile in more money. And I'll talk about anti-dilution a little bit later, but you're going to see that becomes an issue too. Managerial rights and restrictions. A lot of times minority shareholders will write in that you have to get a majority of the minority shareholders to do things like change the CEO salary, make an expenditure of funds above $1 million a year. They may require that the minority shareholders approve the annual budget and then put a 10% variance on spending based on the budget. So there's lots of things where they will try to put some boundaries around the CEO so that even as a minority shareholder, they have the opportunity to protect their investment. Vesting issues. Often they will require that the ownership stake by the founders vest over time. The typical thing will be 2 or 3% a month. So that if you found this company and you get a year in and you say, people are going, this person's nuts, and the board dumps them, they won't own necessarily the whole 79%. They may have only owned, say, 3% times 12 months, 36% of the company. So you don't get that permanent ride. You probably will have to earn your stock a few months at a time. Typically about 3 years, 2 to 3 years is typical to full vesting. So if you're with the company 2 to 3 years, it's common that would constitute full vesting. Maybe 4 years would be typical, but it's not like 10 or 20 years. It's just this, we want to keep the person engaged for a reasonable period of time so that they've really earned the stock that they've gotten. And then comes lots of other investment protection provisions. In other words, they're not going to let you poof away the money. One of which is this idea called anti-dilution. I'm going to talk about this more when we use the down round example. But anti-dilution says if you go out and have to raise money at a lower share price than I bought in, so in other words, I bought your stock at $1 a share, now you're issuing more stock at 50 cents a share, so mine has been diluted. Then there's common to have anti-dilution clauses in there, which basically says you're going to have a way to kind of not necessarily make me whole, but pay me back for some of that $1 to 50 cents. And usually it's the founder stock that pays the bill in that sort of situation. And then let's talk about pricing, but let's hold that for our next video on the deal. Join me then.